Hello, listeners of the future. Hello, rollers far and wide. Welcome back to another episode of Classin' Up the Joint. I am your host and the creative director, GM, and many hat wearer of the Roll Report. My name is Colin. I use they and he pronouns, and I am delighted to once again be joined by a wonderful, fantastic guest to class this joint up real good. Classy guest, please introduce yourself.
Hi there, my name is Rachel Williamson, she, her. I am a third-party publisher for Advanced 5th Edition Dungeons & Dragons. I mostly work for Purple Martin Games and EN Publishing, though I've also produced a work under my own brand, Steampunkette.
Amazing. Rachel, thank you so much for joining us. I am so excited to have you.
Very happy to be here.
Yeah. So I want to reverse the order of things. I'm gonna ask you how you got started a little later, because I want to start with what the general, what is A5E? How does it work? How did you get started, and kind of what are your goals within that system?
So A5E, or Level Up, Advanced 5th Edition, is a product put out by EN Publishing under Russ Morrissey. Great guy, great publishing company. They take good care of their producers.
We love hearing that.
It's an attempt to make a 3-pillar version of Dungeons & Dragons 5th Edition. You have the journey system, you have greater exploration and social options built into every character class, whether it's a fighter or a rogue or a wizard. They all have built-in mechanics, often called knacks, or tricks, things of that nature.
Is that, I'm going to make a comparison just because it kind of sounds like that to me. Is it at all similar to, I'm going to call it like the Pathfinder building system, where you can add feats and things as your character grows and levels up to really create the most, the closest to the vision in your head? Like a wizard with a knack for something that you might think a fighter might be really good at, sort of thing.
Not exactly.
No. Okay.
So to give you an example, you have the fighter with soldiering knacks. Soldiering knacks include things like weather beaten. Exposed to all kinds of weather over your life, you are inured to the most, or all but the most deadly effects. You gain advantage on saving throws against cold and hot weather, as well as any adverse effects from wind or precipitation.
Cool.
Various little details like that make exploration or traveling across the world a little easier. And then built into the class itself, one of the first abilities they get is Steely Mane, which means like steel face. You get a choice between Closed Helm, Heroic Flare, or Watchful Eye. Closed Helm makes enemies or creatures trying to make insight checks on you at disadvantage. Because you are a closed helm, you are stoic and stone-faced, and it's hard to tell what you're thinking. Things of that nature.
Cool. I really love that. So you talk about the 3 pillars that it's trying to get at, and we were just talking about this. Like D&D at its core is a combat simulator, and it's really, that is the single monopole pillar holding up the roof of the whole thing, hoping it doesn't wobble too much from side to side. I guess that my question there, if I have one, is, does A5E handle combat differently, or is it it has ported the rule structures of 5th edition combat and then added all of this nice flavor and things you can do in social settings or in journey settings? Or more?
So the combat structure is pretty much the same. You have action, bonus action, reaction, movement, things of that nature. But they have added some interesting mechanics, which give third-party designers like myself a lot of playroom. Yeah. Specifically, they added combat maneuvers to fighters, rangers, rogues, barbarians, monks. Pretty much every martial class now gets a special thing they can do throughout combat. Cool. There are 13 core martial traditions, ranging from Adamant Mountain to Mirror's Glint, Biting Zephyr for archers, things of that nature.
Cool.
Excuse me.
No worries.
And each of those traditions has different maneuvers at different degrees, and you gain more tradition or more maneuvers as you gain levels. that you can take from one of the 2 or 3 traditions that you learn. So every fighter, even if you're both Eldritch Knights, is going to be different. And for my part, I turned around and created Arcane Knight and Eldritch Blackguard combat traditions. So you can have a fighter who is more magical on top of casting spells. So it's just fun.
Yeah. No, it sounds super fun. It also, again, just kind of in my own attempt to simplify it, it sounds like there are a lot of mechanical things built into leveling up and the classes that also add a lot of flavor, rather than with D&D where I think mostly it's on the players to flavor your spells, to flavor your character, flavor the chef feat that you have because your character likes to cook or whatever. And A5E, it sounds like these things are just built into the character. Oh, we're reaching for a book, reaching for a thing. Yes.
Air conditioner. My dog has come inside and is panting. So.
Oh, buddy. But yeah, but it seems to me that the way you were describing it, there is the flavor of your character is baked into level progression and more baked into the classes mechanically than needing to provide your own.
Exactly. There's also a whole bunch of characterization built into the heritage, culture, background, destiny, origins system.
Yeah.
Rather than having just 5th edition style races, back in 2022, A5E introduced the idea of splitting your race into a heritage and a culture, so that you can have elves from the High Elven culture, but you could also have a human from that High Elven culture.
Interesting. Okay.
Or you can play an elf who is a member of a cosmopolitan city-based culture.
Right.
So they get different traits based on what they get. Well before 5th edition came up with it. I think it was based on the Heritages and Cultures that was produced by a third-party publisher whose name escapes me at the moment.
Well, we'll find if we can. And again, this is something that element does to me sound much more like what I know about Pathfinder. That the species, I have a pet peeve about saying races. I feel like it's weird, but like the species of your character, as well as their actual cultural or societal background, where they grew up, that both of those are much more customizable and affect how your character is built and how it plays later much more.
Yeah, very much so.
Cool. Well, I don't want to dive right into like dumping on 5e as much as like what attracted you most about essentially, I guess, adding on to 5e, like being able to commit to level up to A5e and go like, this is the thing that I want to do. I want to make this system even better.
So I was just a forum poster on EN World forums, which is run by EN Publishing. Excuse me. And I happened to see Level Up as it was being produced, as it was being created. And I saw the journey system, and that in particular as just a preview, long before the books were released, as a preview. And I leapt on it, and I was like, oh, look at how customizable this system is. Look at how you can change the ideas behind it to make it into running a business or political intrigue in a society where you're not making much of a journey. You can just change the names of these little details, and suddenly it's a whole new system. I absolutely loved doing things like that. And the more that came out for A5E, the more interested I got. Peter Martin of Purple Martin Games actually kind of encouraged me to start submitting content for EN Cider. Yeah. Which is EN Publishing's 5th edition monthly periodical. And I got published, which shocked the hell out of me. But apparently people like some of my ideas. I eventually started working directly for EN Publishing. I worked on the Void Runners Codex and the Planestriders Almanac, or Planestriders Journal, I apologize. I've also worked on the Monstrous Menagerie 2.
Cool. Do you... So we're getting into like why this is, I'm going to say, better or at least more expansive than 5th edition. And we've kind of already talked about how, but really why. I'm like trying to think of like the best way to phrase this question. I think it is that what is the value of continuing to build out A5E versus jumping ship for a non D&D at all thing? Have you ever been, I guess, tempted by systems run and powered by the apocalypse or some of the other game systems that are flourishing, Pathfinder even? Like, I guess it is what is your attachment and your belief in A5E as the thing that you, I'm going to say, continue to be writing and creating for?
Well, I've loved Dungeons and Dragons since I was very young. I started right around the same time AD&D 2E launched.
Wow.
I had awesome. The Dark Sun box set and the Psionic handbook as two of my first personal purchases into the system. I've played White Wolf games. I've done homebrew work on White Wolf. I created a setting and game called Night Shift, which was the idea of playing supernatural cops, because that was really a big thing in popular media a couple of decades ago.
Yeah.
Oh, it hurts to say that.
I know the feeling.
I've done work on Mutants and Masterminds material. Again, this is all homebrew. This was never stuff I released or even had the idea that I could release, much less the confidence to do so.
Sure.
It's taken me a long time to get to where I am. As far as why I stick with Advanced 5th Edition, it's been just a couple of years now that I've actually been producing. And the community has embraced me and embraced my work. I've been very supported by the third-party publishers for A5E, for Level Up. And it's just this wonderful community. I've worked with Josh Gentry on his various works. I've worked with Purple Martin Games. I've gotten to work on core rule books for this system at this point. The Planestrider's Guide or Planestrider Journal and the Void Runner's Codex, I helped to name, which Amazing. Was just a great, fantastic personal moment for me.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
It's just been a huge ton of fun and a great community, and I want to stick with them.
Yeah. I think community... my sense has been that community is often what brings people into the larger TTRPG space, away from like, oh, I've been running my home game with my 5 friends for the last 5 years, but really looking into the more expansive community. I think that's why people stick around in a lot of ways. Yeah. That brought up so many things that I want to know about, and we have only so much time and things. So you have, I'm going to say I'm going to call it a successful writing career, in that I'm what I'm hearing and as we have kind of talked about and I've gotten in info from you, like you have a fairly prolific creator, published writer. Do you have a process that you usually use, either from like, pitch to a third-party publisher to completion, or I'm going to make this thing and eventually I'm going to try to shop it around, or is it different with all the things that you've done? Has it changed and evolved as you have?
Well, it depends on the publication in question. The Gate Pass Gazette and the E-Insider are both periodicals. They come out every month. Excuse me, I need to drink something.
No worries.
And both of them have a submission setup. You work with Savannah Broadway or Mike Myler. Every few months, they send out a pitch request. And then you're like, what do I want to write? Archetypes, new systems, character classes are very rare, but they have released a couple so far. And then you submit a pitch, and after a few weeks, Savannah or Mike will look through the different pitches they've got, anonymized, no names attached. And they'll say, oh, I want this one for this month, and I want that one for that month. And then they'll send out a response, and then you write your 2,000 words, 5 cents per word. So that's that process. When it comes to actual books, there's an Ian Publishing Writers Discord. And Russ, Andrew Englebright, Mike Myler, whoever is running that particular project, like the Void Runners Codex or the Planestriders Journal, will say, hey, I'm looking for writers. Do you want to be a part of this? Who wants to be a part of this? And then you sign up, and they will hand out specific ideas of what they want. And then you fill in the blanks. You have a word limit. You have a 10 cents per word on official products. And then you go from there.
Amazing. And get lucky, I think. I really appreciate what you're saying that anonymizing the submissions, right? Because I think we all have conscious or unconscious bias. We're like, oh, that person's published before and I like their work. Given that, even if they're like, actually, that proposal was poorly written and not a thing I'm interested in, but I like that person. Yeah,
that is a thing. Savannah and Mike both will not run your material 2 months in a row. Even if you submit 10 article ideas that they are absolutely in love with, once the anonymizing is taken away, once they put a name on things, they're like, oh, I can't put all these in the span of 10 months. It takes 20 months to get your work finalized. So that's a fun thing. As far as third-party publishing works, Peter Martin runs a third-party publisher Discord where we all just talk about ideas and brainstorm. And when somebody has a project that they feel like it's too big or they just like a particular perspective on, they'll request help. And then since we all use almost all of us use drive-through-rpg.com, we just set up commission splitting there. So if you've done half the book, you get half the proceeds. Right. If you've done a 10th of the book, you get a 10th of the proceeds anytime the book is sold, which is what happened with the Manual of Adventurous Resources Complete, the motif classes system that I designed and Peter published. It's just been great, really.
I love that for you. That's so wonderful. Oh God, I had half a thought and then it ran away. That's it. It can't have been that important if it faded that quickly. I think. I know what it was. As a presumably brief tangent, do you find Drive-Through RPG substantially different than like DM's Guild or some of the other places that do a similar, we will publish your books and take a cut? And I ask out of ignorance. I haven't looked into their back end too much. I am much earlier in my own writing and trying to get it published. So is there an advantage to Drive-Through over DM's Guild or a different place?
Flexibility more than anything. If you sign on for DM's Guild, you are producing DM's Guild content, and that is it. You cannot sell your book on your own from your website. You can't put it on drive-through-rpg.com. It goes to the DM's Guild, and that is it. I also no longer trust Wizards of the Coast.
We can get into that. We got it. We're going to have a whole second. Yeah, for sure.
So I will not work directly with them. They could probably offer me a 5 or 6 figure salary, and I would take it and work for them in a heartbeat because I'm not that proud. But
it's hard to say no to that.
Also, living in Washington, holy crap, that'd be great. But it's I'm not a big fan of their current ownership. Yeah,
very legitimately, I would say. Do you have a favorite of the things you have made? Do you have the favorite child that we don't tell the others? I know I'm putting you a little bit on the spot. The Esper, yeah.
The Esper. My first book, Paranormal Power, I put it on Kickstarter January last year, and or year before last.
What is time? A soup?
Yeah,
Nothing but a soup.
No, it was January 3rd, 2023, and it sold fairly well. I wound up bringing in about $20,000, which is the largest non-official Kickstarter for Advanced 5th Edition so far. I was incredibly proud and humbled by the response that I got from the community. It probably helps that Advanced 5th Edition is also backwards compatible with standard 5e. You can use a 5e archetype with an A5E class without a problem, at least 9 times out of 10.
Sure.
If something requires you to have action surge, the A5E fighter doesn't have it. So there's a little snafus here and there, but not much.
Yeah, I can't think of many. Well, we don't need to get into the weeds, but I'm going to try to think about it a little bit. Yeah.
Paranormal Power is psionics for Advanced 5th Edition and for 5th Edition. I have always loved psionics. Like I said, when I was very young, I started with AD&D 2nd Edition. I had the Psionics Handbook and Dark Sun out of the gate, my first 2 personal purchases. My older brother had the Player's Handbook, DM Guide, and Monster Manual at the time. It was fantastic to explore this esoteric idea of mind-body-soul synthesis to create mystical effects. And I kind of became enamored of the idea of psionics. And then 3rd edition rolled around and didn't have it off the bat. And then they released the Psionics Handbook, and it was basically have a spellcaster, but we'll call it psychic.
Yeah.
And the expanded Psionics Handbook didn't do much different. It just added more of it and more crystals, because New Age...
Well, who doesn't love a good crystal when we're talking about psychics?
Right. 4th edition rolled around and actually had a pretty good setup for their psionic classes. But the GSL, the game systems license, was absolutely terrible for third-party publishers, which is why 4th edition didn't get a whole lot of support and why Pathfinder existed, because Paizo had been creating 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons third-party publishing materials. And then 4th edition hit, the game systems license hit. They can't do that anymore and have a consistent brand. So they created Pathfinder as a way to get around the GSL and cement the OGL in the third-party publishing space. 5th edition comes around. Mike Merles started to try to maybe make a 5th edition Scion, the Mystic. The Unearthed Arcanas were not particularly flattering about it. The response was not great. And the whole Zach S. and everything else catastrophe kind of pushed Mike Merles off to the side. He's still trying to do it on his own now that he's completely out of Wizards of the Coast, which is cool for him. But I had already created the Esper, so it doesn't matter to me anymore.
Yeah, totally.
The Esper was, for me, an attempt to play with the system of spellcasting with the idea of how to break rules in ways that are interesting and engaging without being broken mechanically.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
I mean, I think that is an interesting challenge for most homebrewers, honestly. As I've tried to do it a little bit myself, I appreciate how much work has gone into the attempts at balancing large third-party content and D&D itself. I'm like, okay, someone who does the math and the probabilities has actually thought about this kind of thing, even if I don't agree with it.
The way that I eventually settled on doing that was creating powers as essentially cantrips that you could boost with additional dice, because I did like the idea of the psi dice, the psi knight Unearthed Arcana reveal, but I didn't like the implementation they went with. So instead, you have these augments and you have your psi dice, and you roll psi dice when you use an augment. If you get a 1 or a 2, that psi dice is expended. If you don't get a 1 or a 2, you retain that psi dice. In either case, the augment is applied to the psionic power. For example, telekinesis, you can augment it to add 50 pounds per augment dice or augment applied to it. So if you roll 3 psi dice on it, it's an extra 150 pounds of object you can move, or creature.
Or a creature.
And then if you roll a 1 or 2 on any of those dice, you lose that specific die. And when you start out with a D4, that means half the time you lose your die. So eventually you run out of spell slots. They're not exactly spell slots. The powers aren't exactly as strong as spells, but you're more likely to get more use out of them overall. And then as you increase in levels, your psi dice changes in size, becoming a D6, a D10. So you go from having a 50% chance to a 30% chance to a 20% chance of losing your die. So I thought it was fun.
Yeah. And as I poke through it, and I'm now poking a little bit simultaneously and remembering, it is really cool. Congratulations. It's rad. It's really, really cool. And I guess I want to use that to shift a little bit towards talking about maybe shortcomings with 5e. And for starters, again, in my like little poking back through the official things, for one, it seems like they're not even making an attempt at any sort of psionic anything within the new system. But within the 2014 rules, there was the attempt at like the Soul Knife Rogue and the Psi Warrior Fighter, and I find them lacking. Do you? I think is the question.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, I do. While I respect the idea that archetypes can have psionic power and should, because archetypes are just the perfect venue for blending concepts. The Eldritch Knight is an absolutely fantastic example of that, because you can't, it's very difficult to do an actual Gish in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, and it's, in most editions of Dungeons & Dragons, it's really difficult, because in a given turn, you can either cast a spell or swing a sword. The Eldritch Knight got around that with the War Magic trait so that you can cast a spell and then bonus action make an attack. So you feel more like you're doing both rather than one or the other. Yeah. Mechanically, that's not super important, but narratively and for the fantasy of being a Gish, it's so important. Yeah. The Cyanite and the Soul Knife, as they were produced under 2014's 5th edition, both helped to convey the idea. And I think psi dice were an interesting mechanic. Sure. I think psi dice should have been carried forward into an actual psionic class. Yeah. Some sort of build that would give you context for why the psi dice for the Soul Knife and the Cyanite were what they were. Yeah. Because when you're playing an Arcane Trickster or an Eldritch Knight, you have Wizard and Sorcerer to look at and go, oh, that's what this is. And there just isn't that for the Cyanite or the Soul Knife. No. And I'm sort of imagining in this moment so the class system in D&D, they're all similar. It's all flavors of the same thing. And there's a moment that I'm imagining based on what you're saying that like an entire psionic class, but the subclasses would be very different. If we imagine for a moment like the Soul Knife and the Psi Warrior being subclasses of the same thing, they have their psi dice in common, they probably have a hit dice pool in common, but then one is the sneaky stabby type and one is, no, I'm going to stand in the front line and bash you and also, hit you with my mind. And you could kind of slot in, a version of Aberrant Mind Sorcerer, and again, I see we're kind of going into this thing where it is magic flavored as psionic ability versus a true psionic system and class. But I guess where I'm going is that I could see that a class that has vastly, vastly different subclasses within what the current context of D&D versus something else. Well, what I'm saying instead is a Scion class separate from the fighter Cyanite You still have the psionite under fighter. It gives a better grounding of what the psionite is in relation to the concept of psionics by having a psychic class to compare it to. That's what I mean.
Gotcha. Yeah. And I think I got in this like little imaginary tangent in my head of like how different the current proposed psion or the current rules of psionic classes are. And I think along the same lines, like we've touched a little bit, but what do you see as the shortcomings within? Let's stay with the 2014 rule set for a minute before we dump on the new one, because I do want to. But what do you see as the shortcomings within the 2014 rule set that A5E goes the farthest in its attempts to address or outright fixes?
I would say that
I see lots of thoughts.
The three big ones are the social mechanics that I described as being attached to every class. That is so important to making sure that it's not just the bard doing everything.
Yeah.
Or a high charisma sneaky rogue. It's so important to allow the fighter and the barbarian and the monk to actually contribute in those situations. Because that's where a chunk of the game is played. It's not a combat simulator, it's a role-playing game. So the role-playing and the talking to the NPCs and the convincing them of what's going on, or prying more information out of them, is an important component. And you really don't get that with 5th edition. You have classes that are built for exploration and combat, or social and combat, or just combat. And that's just... that leaves some classes out. Now, that may make them easier for new players, like a fighter or a new player picking up the fighter and picking up the champion. Super easy character to play. They don't have a lot of stress or focus on them. They can kind of sit back in the social sections of the game and see what's going on. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with allowing a person to sit back and pay attention. But the option isn't there for the player who wants to play the fighter and be involved.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. Similarly, travel tends to be something that is either glossed over entirely or used as part of a flowchart of adventure where, you're going to travel to the Fey Princess's castle. Cool. So here are a series of pre-generated random encounters. Doesn't matter what you say you're going to do. These are the encounters you're going to run into on the way there. You will fight one group of bandits. You will find 2 ogres arguing over a goat. And you will find a unicorn trapped under a log that you have to rescue or kill if you want. You know, there's a warlock in the party. You could probably use a horn for Unicorn's some terrible tasty, ritual. Things like that. A5E creating the journey system. So the journey system is random encounter tables based on regions, but it's also, what does your character want to do? You have various options. You can busk. So you can play your guitar as you're riding around on a wagon and have people flinging cash at you just while you're on the journey. Your ranger can befriend an animal. And if there is a random encounter scheduled for that day, that animal will scurry away before the encounter, presaging that it's going to come. If you are scouting, you can see what regions and what tiers of regions, because that's another thing. Regions have tiers to tell you how dangerous the next place is. And you can find out how dangerous the areas nearby are. You can cook and give everybody bonuses. You can literally pray. And if you pray hard enough and well enough, you can find magic items on the journey or boons from your gods for finding some small temple, or not temple, but shrine along the roadside and things of that nature. There's all kinds of things you can do on the journey that it prompts and builds, rather than just being, okay, here's a random encounter table, roll on that.
Right.
So there's more support in that regard. And I friggin' love that so much.
Yeah. I think within D&D, that is, but you're right that it is definitely an afterthought, right? The system is designed as a combat simulator, but to make the journeying and the social interactions both more compelling and more accessible to every member of your party, I have found that is just, the DM has to do an exceptionally good job, or invent some interesting new versions of mechanics for the journey.
Yeah.
And
there's not systemizes it really well in a balanced and engaging manner.
Yeah. And it makes it so much easier for a DM to construct something that is fun and compelling and interesting to your party when that support exists, versus when you're really trying to pull it out of your own ass.
And then, go ahead.
I was gonna say you pull a lot of good stuff out of your ass, but it's like, it's nice when it's already exists.
Yeah. And then, of course, the other thing is the martial maneuvers, the martial traditions. Mm-hmm. I cannot stress enough how engaging they are and how much more it makes the battlefield into something customizable rather than something that just occurs. Mm-hmm. You get maneuvers that don't really add much more damage to your attacks, but they make your misses more important, or they maneuver creatures around the battlefield. You can push enemies more often while still making a regular attack, instead of having to give up your damage for that round to try and shove somebody off a cliff.
Right.
One of the adamant mountain abilities is batter away, where you take your big two-handed weapon and you swing it so hard you hit the guy and knock them away. So it's just a Louisville Slugger swing to punt someone off a cliff, which is so dramatic and fun when you're playing a big berserker type character. Yeah. So strong, and you just fling, off they go.
I've had a lot of fun with an out of place baseball player who just uses like a maul or a great club reflavored as a bat. Side note. Those are all areas that published material for 5e, I think, just is I haven't gotten the sense that it's considered. I have gotten the sense that Wizards, as they are, as they revised 2014 rules, as they came out with the new rules, this focus is still just, no, we're a combat simulator game. Well, whatever that. Yeah, sure. Make a charisma check, that it's still just unimportant to them.
That's another fun aspect. There are saving throws against your combat maneuvers. So you have a combat maneuver DC, which is 8 plus proficiency plus strength or dexterity, and you can force enemies to make saves against your stuff. So you narrow that gap between the fighter types and the wizardy spellcasting types a little bit further.
Right.
And it's just so much fun.
Yeah. And we roll dice in this game. Rolling more dice is more fun.
Well,
mostly.
Rolling more dice is more fun so long as you're not rolling, okay, I have to make an attack roll, I have to make a saving throw, I have to do the damage, I have to do that, because then you're just padding out your turn length. But when you make an attack roll and then the DM makes a saving throw, it feels more crunchy.
Yeah. Yeah. It is rough, I think, as a player when whatever you're doing, whatever system you're in, if it is a system like these that there are multiple dice in math, and you're like, well, I got to add, I don't know, rogue. I got to add my sneak attack. I got to add, maybe this other thing and this other thing.
Sunblade does an extra D8 of radiant. Oh, wait, no, that's undead. 2 extra D8 of damage.
And I'm going to smite on top of it. That's another 4 D8. Excuse me. It's an undead, another D8, I like to think there's something of a lesson of like, as you would learn your character, you try to make those turns happen quickly. You do your best, and it's still tough. I had an assassin, arcane archer multi-class, so there's a sneak attack and there's the D6s from a magical arrow and all this other things. And I tried really hard to just be like, nope, I do this. And I had a feat so I can re-roll a thing and I do a thing. And it still was like a minute and a half for 2 arrows. But
it just takes a long time sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. So on a similar note, I think the new 2024 rule set. I make the same face every time I think about it. I think regardless of our mutual dislike for it, which I think is mutual, are there things about how they have changed any mechanics that you know that you are in favor of? As someone who has a long history both with D&D and writing, like you understand the background and what goes into these changes. Are there any things that you can pick out that you're like, actually, yes, that was a really good change. I approve of that.
Weapon masteries for fighters. Actually a good change to try and create more variation, more customizability within the class. I just don't think it goes far enough. Yeah. I think with A5E right there, with Level Up right there, showing combat traditions, showing these incredibly customizable designs and having them work, Wizards of the Coast really should have looked around the industry a bit more and said, oh, that's cool. And it's under the OGL. We can work with that. We can build on third-party publishers rather than demanding third-party publishers always and only build off of us. Not that I'm not sure I expect Russ Morrissey would have agreed to it after everything Wizards of the Coast and specifically through Hasbro has done recently. But before the interview, I was telling you, Colin, that I released my Kickstarter for Paranormal Power January 3rd, 2023, and the OGL 1.2 debacle happened literally days later in the same month. And that is why I do not work on strict 5th edition material anymore, because I don't trust them to leave the OGL alone. Even after they've made this gigantic mistake with the huge backlash, it's not the first time they tried.
Well, and the other thing we were saying, like, they keep doing it. You know, this is gonna be the dunk on Hasbro and Wizards for a solid few minutes. Like, I can only imagine how much more the OGL fiasco especially has affected you as a multiple times published author within their system and within A5E. And then they keep doing it. They keep doing something that, you know, my assessment is someone somewhere says, oh, this will save us money or make us money. And then everyone that plays the game is like, no, we won't buy that.
Do you know what was in the OGL 1.2? Did you actually take a look at it?
I took a quick look. I mostly was looking at what people with finer legal minds than I had written about it. My remembrance, please correct me, but my remembrance is that the original OGL essentially said you can use our system and our rule set, and you, the new creator, will own the rights to what you publish as long as you include this legalese about where it comes from and our logo somewhere. And the 1.2 basically reversed that and said, sure, you can publish stuff under our rule set and with this legalese and our logo. And also now you don't own that. We own that.
So it's actually a little bit more than that. But yes, that is the main driving portion of it.
Okay. What did I miss?
Under the OGL 1.1 or 1.0, whichever one you want to refer to, it's not just you can use our material. It's you are making your material public for everyone. When I published Paranormal Power, I specifically, through the OGL, gave everyone around the world permission to make archetypes for the Esper, to take my monsters and republish the mechanics of my monsters in their own works. If Purple Martin Games wanted to, under the terms of the OGL, they could take the entire Esper class and just republish it. They would still have to credit me for writing it, but they could make money off the work.
Okay. And someone writing an adventure specifically versus a new set could take the monsters that you had created and use them in that and provide the stat blocks and things with proper attribution.
Exactly. The only thing that is actually not allowed is product identity. So if I have Eladrin as specifically members of the Summer Court, and here are my specific rules for them within a given campaign setting, and I have all these different mechanics for all these different rules, you can use the mechanics, but you can't use my Summer Court.
Right. Okay.
So you can't describe it in the same way. You can use the numbers and the balance that I've worked on.
Sure.
Without saying the exact same words.
Okay.
And that's how it's been for 20 years, well, 24 years at this point, since 2000. And then Wizards of the Coast was like, no. Also, you must submit everything you want to release and everything you've ever released to us to look through. And we can say, no, you're not allowed to publish that because we have problems with what you're publishing.
Wow.
And we have the right to take anything you've written, use it, and not attribute it to you or give you a red cent.
It is worse than I thought. Okay, so for one, just setting aside the monumental fuck up of thinking that people would agree to this. Two, they're creating monumental amounts of work for themselves, trying to go back through all the third-party content and vet it.
They never intended to. The intention was to stop old content from ever being sold again.
Yeah.
You would send it into them, it would go into a folder, and it would just stay there forever. You would never get the go-ahead. At least that's my interpretation of what it was.
Yeah. Because otherwise they are creating an immense amount of work for someone. And an immensely problematic gatekeeping of what is allowed to be publishing if it is according to their standards. Because they can say, like, I don't like the way you made Drow not evil, and not publish it.
Part of that, do you know anything about the new TSR saga with Justin Lanasa?
Passingly, not really. I think that was an episode of Slovenly Trolls that I listened to a little while back. Please fill me in.
Very abbreviated version. Justin Lanasa saw that the TSR license copyright had run out. So he immediately jumped on it for $50 and then said, we are the Game Wizards. We are TSR, the original. We're bringing it back. He had no connection to original D&D, to original TSR. Okay. But because he had the name, he tried to claim the clout. He went out and he got hold of Jeff Duck Leeson, who was one of the original designers and writers, and who was there from the beginning with Ernie and Dave Arneson. And he managed to get a hold of Ernie Gary Gygax Jr. To sign on and work with him, who was, the son of Gary Gygax. And he also hooked up with some horrible, literal Nazis.
Oh, fun. This is sounding more familiar.
They tried to release Star Frontiers New Galaxies, and there was a leak of the material. And it was literally just racist super science from the 1940s, or not super science, pseudoscience.
Yeah.
From the 1940s and 50s. And it was disgusting. There were specific notes that there are no trans species because he didn't like the idea of there being transgender people. If you take a look at the Dungeon Hobby Shop Museum or the new TSR Facebook posts, I don't know all the names. Sure. You'll see a bunch of homophobic and racist memes. And to some degree, Wizards of the Coast was using that debacle because they were setting up court battles against this guy and his company.
Sure.
In order to say, oh, hey, well, we don't want that. So you have to do all of this.
But it's a real slippery slope from we don't want that to we don't want what you made that also states that trans people exist. Or again, that orcs are not all evil or whatever they don't approve of.
Well, not even that, because they don't have to not approve it or anything. They can just hold it in limbo forever. And if they happen to take a look at it and like what you've written, use it for themselves. And pretty much every third-party publisher immediately turned on them. Paizo was literally lawyering up and set up a sort of group setup. I know EN Publishing was looking at joining any sort of, or I think I'll say I think rather than I know.
Sure.
That Ian Publishing was looking at joining in on that and stuff. It was just a horrible mess. It led to the ORC license, which I got in on, talking with people, trying to help work it out. There's a Discord server for that because Discord is just so useful.
It really is.
Eventually, the whole, we give up on the OGL 1.2. We're putting everything for 5th edition into the Creative Commons. At that point, essentially, Wizards of the Coast had given up on doing it. But I'm pretty sure that's a big chunk of why the 2024 edition was being pushed so hard and so quickly.
Yeah.
And why D&D Beyond tried to delete or tried to update all of their material to the 2024 standards rather than the 2014 standards.
Yeah.
So it would not be under Creative Commons. I actually don't know if that's true, though, because I haven't looked at whether or not 2024 is in the Creative Commons. I didn't buy the book because Wizards of the Coast has lost me as a customer and a producer. So
I think they've lost many people. And again, as we said, they continually misstep. Wherever the directives are coming from, if it's coming from Hasbro higher up saying make more money, like whatever it is, again, I'll say I just got an email asking me about like to get in on the ground floor of like D&D trading cards. And like, is this just Magic the Gathering now? Like what's happening here? Yeah. Well, and it makes sense that they would try to push a thing that is solely owned versus something that people can actually contribute to, unfortunately and horribly. Welcome back to the mid-roll. Friends, family, almost certainly, supporters all, thank you for joining us for this episode of Classin' Up the Joint. I'm here to remind you of a couple changes we're making. Change number 1, the full episode goes out on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and wherever you find your podcast now. We're not cutting any more of it. You get the whole thing. But if you like what we do and you think you want to hear more of it, and if you have questions for our interview guests, if you support the show on Patreon at patreon.com/therollreport for as little as $1 a month, you can submit a list of questions to be asked by any of our interview guests on Classin' Up the Joint. They will answer them, and only our wonderful Patreon supporters will hear the answers to those questions. Coming up, we have a Classin' Up the Joint with Sebastian Yue. Sebastian, among other things, again, editor of the Cosmere RPG, written the Field Guide to Floral Dragons, full-time employee, community manager for Hit Point Press, a really incredible and amazing game designer, writer, editor, GM, player, so many cool things. And Sebastian is working on so many amazing stuff. Amazing stuff? I know English, plurals. So submit your questions. Head on over to patreon.com/therollreport. Join us for as little as $1 a month and send me some more questions because I got a couple good ones for Sebastian, but it's nothing compared to what all of you have, I'm sure. And if you want to know specific things about the Cosmere RPG or Floral Dragons or any one of the million other things Sebastian's working on for Hit Point Press and independently, support the show. Send us a question, and you will hear the answer. We are also going to have several other really incredible guests coming back, and with those guests coming back, like Kitty Stryker, hopefully Patrick Preeny and Emily Graymore from Unbalanced Encounters, and definitely the Slovenly Trolls, we're going to do some deep dives into the 2024 rules update. We're going to look back at some of our favorite classes that have been mentioned on the show before and see whether or not they got an upgrade, a downgrade, or somewhere in between. Stay tuned for those coming at you a little bit later this year. Lastly, a huge thank you to everyone who has listened to the show and supports us on Patreon or doesn't support us on Patreon but just likes what you hear. Let us know. We love hearing from you, and we are so deeply grateful for your support and your listening and all of your friendships and more. Don't forget to follow us on social media at The Roll Report Cast on Instagram and TikTok. Back to the show. Final dunking on Wizards. Any final dunking? I want to gently shove us along the interview train.
I think I've done enough damage right now.
We've dug. We've thoroughly done. So one of the things we were talking about that I want to go back to is the community that has grown up around the RPG space, D&D specifically, and A5E, and actually even rewinding further to my what used to be my first question that I would have asked almost an hour ago. You've been playing for a long time. If I was tracking it, I think close to 40 years.
30.
And 30. Yes, 80s.
34.
I can count. I think my sense has been that the community has grown significantly and branched out into a much wider all-encompassing group of people with many little branches here and there. And I wonder if you can speak to that as someone who has been part or at least been peripheral, if not part of the community for a very long time, how it's changed. And I would argue positively, but I think as someone with more knowledge, if you can speak to that.
Well, I will say that in the 90s, when I first started playing, it was a little more insular than I would have liked because the whole satanic panic thing was still going. It was losing steam and it would die by the mid-90s, but it was still a thing. But it was also an absolutely flourishing time for Dungeons and Dragons as far as players were concerned. Not so much on the business side of things.
Sure.
The campaign settings, the splat books were consistent and interesting. Well, consistently released and interesting.
Yeah.
They weren't always consistent quality.
Right.
But that's a separate matter. But you also had the novels, which were absolutely huge at the time for normalizing the ideas that were in Dungeons and Dragons. The characters, the characterization, the role play, the worlds themselves. Even if the Dark Sun books weren't that good compared to, say, R.A. Salvatore's Halfling's Gem and such, it was a major background note that got a whole bunch of people who aren't interested in role-playing games specifically to support this product because they liked to read and they were cheap paperbacks. And then TSR went under, sadly, in 1996, 1997. Wizards of the Coast bought them out using all of their big money from Magic the Gathering. They created the OGL because of what happened with them and Palladium Games when they were a third-party publisher. And then third edition came out in 2000, and it was resoundingly massive from what I remember. They actually advertised it in more places than comic books.
Wow.
Which was huge. I was a comic nerd as a kid, so I saw Dungeons and Dragons and advertisements here and there. But there was a whole lot more to it. Barnes and Noble and other bookstores were still kind of a big thing in the early 2000s.
Yep.
Amazon was a bookstore at the time. And you saw the books on the shelves, and they were good-looking books. Like, don't get me wrong, the second edition and the AD&D and D&D books had interesting covers, but third edition really put it over the top by making it look like a fancy-looking book. And they carried that forward into 3.5, and then fourth edition kind of went back to the original design, but did it in a new way that was very engaging visually. And again, the fourth edition drop was massive. I wound up going to a local gaming store in Orlando, Florida, and we did a 24-hour session of just making characters, playing games, just
amazing.
in the place. Myself, my friend group, ran games for people, just had a ton of fun.
Yeah.
And at the midnight launch, we watched people come in, look at us, go, and then walk over and buy the books and walk out. it was great. It was so much fun and
That's
engaging.
amazing.
And one of my favorite little stupid memories was just going to a Denny's at 3 a.m. because I was working graveyard shifts and stuff, and seeing a person just sitting in a booth reading the Forgotten Realms campaign setting for a third edition, just by themselves, eating their Grand Slam or whatever, just reading that book. And I just, made me feel so seen.
Yeah.
And then 5th edition launched, and Jesus, it was so huge. And Critical Role and Dimension 20 and the Adventure Zone and all these different groups putting it online and making it blow up even harder. And then COVID-19 hit, and suddenly everyone was looking for things to do at home, and online exploded. I have like 4,000 hours on Roll20 from where I've been running and playing games.
Wow. Like just in the last couple of years?
I don't know how long it's been, but
yeah.
Lots and lots of time. It's just, it's been great to see the game and the community built around it flourish.
Yeah.
And more than that, to see it splinter into other games as well. Watching people learn about Call of Cthulhu or Paranoia or Powered by the Apocalypse, like you mentioned. Absolutely fantastic. Even the new Daggerheart from Critical Role's publishing company, whose name I can't think of at the moment, has fantastic stuff in it. I wish they hadn't gone for the card-based classes, because it's really hard for a third-party publisher to get in on that and produce content for that sort of game. But the hope and fear dice mechanic is just fantastic.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, no, I was going to say the thing that I'm waiting for is what is it? Demiplane is sort of doing this, but the cross-game, cross-platform character builder online that, like, again, I think when D&D Beyond came out, and one of the reasons that it helped D&D explode so much during pandemic is all of the information you need is always at your fingertips. You hover over a spell description and it's right there, like all of your abilities, everything. And what I'm really waiting for is something where that same thing exists, but the database and the character builder lets you create for D&D or Pathfinder or Daggerheart or Tales of the Valiant or Call of Cthulhu, or as many different variations as possible. And my sense has been some people have built kind of individual versions of this, figure out how to make Google Sheets or Dice Cloud do the thing that they want. But the convenience and the simplicity and the user interface of like how D&D Beyond and Demiplane do it applied to as many games as possible.
Unfortunately, it's just not going to happen. For the same reason you get Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus, and you have each of them wanting to get their money, because it is a business at the end of the day. Don't get me wrong. I love this game. I love designing stuff for this game, but I also want to make enough money to get by. So I can't just give away everything I've written.
Yeah. I will say to I guess unpaid quick pitch for Demiplane. It seems like their library is growing, and it currently includes the beta of the Cosmere RPG, the Brandon Sanderson RPG, Daggerheart, Pathfinder, the Marvel Multiverse RPG, Starfinder, Vampire the Masquerade. Actually, wow, it's more than I thought.
Damn. Okay, I was wrong.
Right?
I admit that I was wrong.
Avatar. There's an Alien RPG.
Oh yeah.
And Candela Obscura. And they say something called Hunter the Reckoning, Mutant Year 20 something. I can't quite read it. And 5E Nexus are all coming soon. So I guess Demiplane is trying. However, they're negotiating around capitalism and the fact that this is a business. Yeah. To return to community a little bit, my sense has also been that one of the things that has happened most in the last 15 to 20 years is the growth of the community into areas that were not necessarily intended to be the original audience. Original D&D and some of these games were extremely sexist, rooted in weird racist ideology, or if not ideology, at least just factually, orcs bad is racist. And now that it is a much more diverse and inclusive version of both of the community and of the game. And I feel like within 5e, your own work has had a large hand in crafting that and like bringing the inclusivity in. I don't want to say why is that important, because I think it obviously is, but I think I would ask not a general comment, but how do you feel about your work in continuing to create that diverse community that is as supportive as we've talked about?
I think it's incredibly important, not just for issues of race or gender, but also disability. For example, I may not look disabled, but I wear glasses for a reason. You know, I have mobility issues and things of that nature, which aren't immediately apparent to most people. So in my new book, I'm including mobility aids as an important thing. But even the core rule books for advanced 5th edition have wheelchairs and prosthetics within the standard adventuring gear, because it's important. In their setup of languages, if you can speak a language, you can also sign it, because that kind of tiny detail is important to have. The idea that somebody can just cast regenerate and get rid of any sort of penalty someone was born with, while there are some people who may enjoy that fantasy for themselves, it shouldn't be the assumed default.
Yeah.
People should be able to create heroes and heroic moments for themselves based on themselves. This idea that everyone should be He-Man or She-Ra and everything else non-existent is just pointlessly self-limiting.
Yeah.
So it's important.
And I think it gets to something that the original rule sets and multiple editions, and it is I'm going to call it the principle of erasure. If you don't mention this thing, it doesn't exist within our fantasy world. And I feel like that has been a major drawback as you look at the history of published content for D&D, and again until the last, I'm going to say 20-ish years.
It has been a thing. It isn't helped by the fact that Gary Gygax was an avowed sexist. And I don't say that lightly. I mean, he wrote a letter and published it where he was like, I am a sexist. I believe in this massive dichotomy, and he specifically targeted feminist groups to insult them in that letter. And that's where the harlot table came from, the infamous roll for prostitute. Roll
for what kind of harlot you encounter. I'm going to briefly refer our listeners back to the Slovenly Trolls, who have done multiple long deep dives that are cry laughing the entire time. Also important in this context, and I did not mean to cut you off, but I deeply respect and approve the immense amount of work that those women have done in their research and their history.
The name Slovenly Troll appears on that table.
It does.
It's important work that they're doing, and I really support them and I appreciate them, because not all of us have the bandwidth to go through that and work with people to get them to understand what it is, why it's wrong. Things of that nature.
The spoons and the spell slots, because there's so much of it. And then you look into the history and doing a little more dives, and honestly, there's ways that, as some of what I've listened to of their episode of the Slovenly Trolls episode, and my own reading about the history of D&D, honestly, until mid 90s, I'm mildly embarrassed of what was officially being put out as a general statement in its lack of diversity and inclusivity. So I think the last question that I want to ask in that specific regard, what, if anything, do you think that we owe each other as not hitting my microphone in the middle of it, we, the sort of broader neurodivergent, queer, non-heteronormative white man playing D&D and RPG community? What, if anything, do we owe each other to continue
Grace.
trying to make this? Yeah, for sure.
More than anything, grace, because not all of us understand exactly what's at stake. Not all of us. There is a stigma around the idea of being political in games, but everything is political. Everything has always been political. When you create art which ignores certain aspect of existence, you are making a statement in that absence, whether you intend to or not.
Yeah.
When you unintentionally spread anti-Semitic conspiracy theories through your work, which I almost did at one point. I was fortunate enough to have a wonderful Jewish woman who spoke to me and said, "Do not do this," because I didn't recognize it for what it was. I was not hugely in that space and didn't recognize it. I saw it as simply having gnomes turn into goblins, rather than it being this trope of Ham and his sons and Jewish people bad because of this.
Yeah.
I wasn't aware of it. So having that grace for each other is something that I am very grateful for, and that I am always going to have for others.
Yeah.
Whether designer or player or anyone else.
And I think to say the same thing slightly more words, assume best interests. I think especially within this community, most people that I have encountered have a good heart and good intentions behind what they are doing, whether or not they might slip into racist or sexist stereotypes and tropes out of ignorance, or just that's the story I want to tell, to give each other the grace to assume that everyone has a good intention and is not Gary Gygax trying to intentionally bait feminists.
Man, what a guy. And those reviews he held all the way up to the end. You can find posts from Gary Gygax on the EN World forums where he's just like, "Yep, I am a sexist. Here is the reason why women don't play Dungeons and Dragons." And he was saying that in 2004.
And we can blame him for not making an inviting environment for women to play in. We can blame him for a lot of things.
There's a list.
Yeah.
But this is not the Slovenly Troll, so I'll try and not say it all.
Yeah. No, we love to dump on poorly written ancient history of D&D here. We really do.
I do want to say, I do not agree with Gary Gygax in a lot of things. I am grateful he created Chainmail and Dungeons and Dragons, and we will always owe him for that.
Yeah.
But also screw that guy for everything else.
Yeah, fuck that guy. Without a much larger and potentially more charged tangent, this is, I think, to me, a question of, can we separate the art from the artist, right? And we've seen this over and over again with Michael Jackson, with
J.K. Rowling.
J.K. Rowling, Kevin Spacey, number of people that in the last 20 years have been revealed to be shitheads or otherwise horrible people. Can we appreciate the art they've made and not appreciate the person? I think that's a personal thing. Yeah, I think it's a very personal question, and I think for me, at least, it varies person to person. I do value the creations and the legacy of D&D that Gary Gygax left, but fuck that guy.
My big thing is he's gone and no longer has any kind of control or economic benefit from it, and he hasn't had that since the 90s. So every D&D I've played has been a D&D without Gygax.
Yeah.
So 2nd edition, 3rd edition, 3.5, 4th edition, 5th edition, 2024, they are all without Gygax. They have their own problems.
Sure.
3rd edition Zach S, or 5th edition Zach S, that is a problem. And you have to deal with that. But it's not Gygax anymore.
Yeah.
Rowling, still making money hand over fist off Harry Potter. There is no ethical way to consume Harry Potter because she literally has stated that she considers anyone who buys her products to be supporting her, and she takes the money from them and works against trans people with it.
Yeah.
Same sort of thing with Chick-fil-A.
It is the still living artist, I think, is a very difficult one. And as much as, again, to touch specifically on Harry Potter, there has been what I have seen statements and actions of, no, we, the community of queer people that love Harry Potter, we are claiming your art for us. Fuck you, Dumbledore was gay. And I think that is within anyone's right to say, no, you don't get to own this art that was deeply impactful and life-changing to me just because you've revealed yourself to be a shitty, transphobic, sexist asshole. And then you do have to wrestle with the ethical implications of consumption of that media or purchasing of that media.
I would say that purchasing of it is the problem. If you want to pirate some of her stuff and just read it on your own, fine. I don't think it's very good. But,
it's
maybe you have
really not when you look at it with critical literaries. Yeah, totally.
Excuse me.
Yeah. Well, to leave transphobic, shitty people behind for a minute and move on to our truly important questions, the most important questions. Rachel, what is your favorite character class?
Well, I really do like the Esper because I created it and I have an affinity for it. But I'm also currently working on 4 new classes for my next book, Martial Artistry.
Ooh, okay.
They're actually behind me in this very blurry image that you can't see yet. They are the Warcaster, the Gunslinger, the Sentinel, and the Champion. And they all play with martial combat in interesting new ways. The Warcaster is all about using martial maneuvers and martial traditions with cantrips rather than a bow and arrow or a sword. So it's got a different structure. And narratively, they're all tied to this concept of military academies trying to create magical artillery for their units.
Right.
The Champion takes up a cause. It's not quite a paladin oath, but they're more broad, more generic structures. And then it plays with 4th edition style enemy marking and ally marking to give you reactions and bonus actions and interesting things you can do in relation to the characters you have marked.
Cool.
The Sentinel is your character split into 2 people, a player character and an NPC, smaller character, so that you get more actions in a round, but the individual actions you get are less powerful. So you can be a fighter and a cleric, but your cleric won't heal as hard as a regular cleric. So you still get to have the action economy of both characters, and it's sort of like a ranger with a companion animal, except your companion animal is a person that you can roleplay. Or if you happen to have a little sibling or a nibbling who is trying to learn D&D, you can hand them your companion character to bring them into the game on the player's side instead of the DM side, without having to create a whole new character to play at the table,
right? Which
is a lot of fun. And then the Gunslinger is just, I enjoyed the Pathfinder original Gunslinger design with grit. And I wanted to update it to work with the combat maneuvers that Advanced 5th Edition has. And I'm going to work on a campaign setting. I'm working on a campaign setting separate from martial artistry that plays into Gunslingers.
It's very exciting. So, as a quick side note, we will have links to where you can find and purchase or kickstart back all of these things in the show notes. I'm going to make sure that I either write those down or that we connect on them a little later. Yeah. And you know, we've talked about the Esper a lot, but like, I think what you have done with that is so cool. Like I am both impressed on a like technical writing level and also on the creative level of how you have really brought this whole thing to life in a way that makes sense and still feels balanced with the rest of the game. It's not you have not created the super class or anything, you know.
That is always a temptation, and I've resisted so far.
Sure. I'm curious, just to poke for a second, is there a class from the let's call it the 2014 standard plus, you know, counting Artificer and Blood Hunter if you want. Is there something from core D&D? Is there any of the classes that you either like, feel as well built, well balanced? Is there one of those that if someone was like, you are playing D&D 5e, pick a class? Well,
without question,
I'm going to twist your hand. Yeah?
Warlock is one of the best designed, most innovative character classes that 5th edition put out. Oh my God, it's so good from a crunchy mechanical standpoint. Setting up short rest spell slots, setting up the invocations, the amount of customization you can put into a character, just with those two mechanics is so fantastic. And then having the patron and having the pact boon to make it even more dense or densely customizable. I absolutely love that class. I based the Esper's design off of them to some degree.
Cool. Okay. Yeah. That kind of makes sense.
A lot of A5E is kind of based on the Warlock. If you take a look at it, the Soldiering Max, that sort of mechanic that every class has is kind of an invocation.
Yeah.
They just tend to be non-magical instead.
Yeah.
And it's such a great design. And whoever wrote that, I am talking to you through the camera right now. I would kiss you. You did great. Do more. Do more. Excuse me.
Which it does make me briefly want to ask, did they even make the new Warlock yet? They did. How do you feel about the 2024 Warlock? Oh God, I can't even look at it. I have to buy it for $60.
Yeah. The new Warlock takes a lot of the things that made it interesting and unique and erases them.
Yeah.
That made me so very angry. Advanced 5th edition made it so that everybody gets the invocations after a fashion with the Nax, exploration invocations essentially, and then made it into a mana point, spell point caster, and then your spell points recover at the end of a short rest. And they did that so that you would have slightly more spell points, so you could cast an additional low-level spell rather than everything at your highest level all the time. And I really appreciated that design. And the friggin' Warlock from 2024 just... Yeah. I've been trying to keep my language nice, but it shits the bed. It does it so badly.
Yeah, it does. I think the next like several interviews I'm going to try this, asking everyone for one thing, something that they don't hate about the 2024 rule set, and it's going to be hard to find, I'm sure. Or something that they didn't totally fuck up. Yeah. Well, okay. Same question to subclasses, to specific, more specific things in there. And, I guess I'm curious if it is also going to be among the Esper or the classes that you are writing, or something else.
For archetypes, that one's a bit more difficult.
Well, I have exponentially increased your options while simultaneously going, no, pick. Top 3. I don't know. I one does not need to be singled out, but what is up at the forefront of your mind when you think about the archetypes available?
For just 5th edition or for any edition? For A5E or no?
Yeah. Totally. Open field. If it is one that is not 5e, I'm going to be a little less familiar to it. So I would say, tell me a little more about it. But yeah, anything is fair game.
So Manual of Adventurous Resources Complete introduced the Wielder class. And it is an absolutely fantastic, well-designed class around the concept of the person who is entrusted with an artifact at level 1. It is your father's sword, which grows in power as you grow in power, type mechanic. And I love the Torchbearer. The actual class itself is sort of a warlock in that you get some spells, but they're all through your magic item. You can get armor, you can get a necklace, you can get a weapon, you can, different things. Excuse me. And the Torchbearer is this really... It hits on the conceit of the magic item being the more important part of the character than most of the wielders.
Yeah.
You are the blazing torch of this weapon or this magic item. So one of the abilities they get is to use concentration on 2 spells simultaneously, as long as they both have a range of self or touch, and you target yourself, because you're casting one on yourself and one on your weapon, or one on your armor, or one in your amulet.
Right.
And it's such a subtle, and it feels like a small design choice, but when you consider that it's a D8 quasi-fighter, quasi-caster, it becomes this really important aspect of the character.
Yeah. I mean, that is some actually very, even with the restriction of self or touch, I think there are a number of concentration spells that being able to have 2 of them up at once really changes what you're able to do. Yeah. Cool. Where, I think tell me one more time where that one is from. I might have just missed it or glossed over.
The Manual of Adventurous Resources Complete, published by Purple Martin Games. It was a hybrid work. Peter Martin put out, he worked with, let me get you the credits.
Yeah.
Andrew Engelwright, Jocelyn Gray, Peter Martin, me, Josh Gentry. The lead designer was, of course, Peter Martin. Andrew Engelwright, Jocelyn Gray, and Josh Gentry were the main designers. And then I contributed a couple of archetypes, so they put a writing credit in for me. But really, I did very little of the book, and I just helped with the editing.
Yeah.
But the Wielder is just such a well-designed class. It's so interesting and engaging. Yeah. And I don't get to play it because I'm a forever DM.
Well, I mean, clearly we'll just have to play a game together sometime, and that's the only way to make that thing happen. I share Warlock. Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm here for it. I've been considering that because so many of the people that I meet, like yourself, are amazing, and I want to maintain a connection and want to get to play with people because literally everyone has these amazing creative ideas for what they want to do with a character, how they want to play, or are bringing in this really cool third party stuff that I was not aware of. I'll DM for you any day. Can
I give you an elevator pitch for an adventure I'm looking at for my campaign setting?
Yeah, absolutely.
The adventure is called 10 Minutes Till Sundown.
Okay.
You and the rest of the party members, starting out as very low-level characters, I think I've got it set for level 3, are soulless. And you have to ride dusk into the plane of shadow, into the Dusklands, to chase down the ghost train where your souls are currently traveling to the afterlife.
Wow.
It's a train heist to recover your own souls. After that, you have to go after the guy who did it.
Yeah. I love that. I do have a pretty damn good train heist one shot that I have built and run a number of times that would be really fun to graph that onto. I'm here for it.
I'm building an entire campaign setting around that concept.
It sounds so cool. I mean, I just immediately there's so many good thematic archetypes or cinematic archetypes to play with that immediately to me smacks of Western. And that is just this whole interesting, wild, unfolding genre that you can take the racism and sexism out of and make a more good Western. Yeah. Wow. Rachel, thank you so much for joining me. It has been such a pleasure to get to speak with you. I deeply appreciate you taking the time. Where can people find you on the interwebs if they're looking, or where can they find your work? Where would you like people to look for some of the things we've talked about, or for you?
Well, Steampunkette is my username pretty much everywhere. If you want to find me on Tumblr, if you want to find me on the EN World Publishing Forum or EN World Forums, just look for Steampunkette. And I'm often available to talk on Discord. I'm a writer. I stay home and just play around on the internet, write stuff, come up with new ideas. You can find me there. You can find my work connected to EN World. Otherwise, head for drivethroughrpg.com and buy Paranormal Power, please.
Do it. It's so cool. It's so cool. You're going to want this. And we will put links to, I'm going to try to get links to all the stuff that I can find in our show notes. So you, dear listeners, do not have to do more than one click, because that is apparently the attention span of the world these days. Someday I'll think of a good way to end the things. But again, Rachel, thank you so much for joining me. It has been such a pleasure to chat with you, and we'll get to play together. It's going to happen.
It's been a great time, Colin. I look forward to it.
Yeah, me too. All right. And with that, good evening, rollers. Good afternoon. Whatever time it might be. Until next time.
Bye.